Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us to review the Salesforce Winter 16 release. We've got lots of things to talk about, but before we get started, I'd like to go ahead and show you a few things about EnablePath. My name is Calder Justice, and I'm here with Ernest Lessinger, who's going to take us through the Winter 16 release. A few fun facts about EnablePath. We are a Platinum Cloud partner with Salesforce. We are proud of having over 360 certifications within the company. We have over 2,000 successful engagements underneath our belt. We have a customer base of 875 and growing quickly, and something we're very proud of is our customer satisfaction rating of a 9.3 out of 10. So without any further ado, I will turn this over to Ernest and we will get started.
Excellent, thank you, Calder. And first thing I want to do before I get started on the webinar in full is talk about our EnablePath Lens Health and Audit Service. I'll tell you a little bit later about how you can take advantage of this, but Lens is a static analysis tool for Salesforce metadata that gives you access to some standard reports, not only on the Salesforce data model, the S objects, but also on the data in your Salesforce org. Things like data volumes, growth over time, and so forth, as well as reports on Salesforce custom development, including unit test coverage, code comments, types of classes, and interfaces that you're using, and the like. As all of this is delivered to you with a digital signature that you can use for audit and compliance, along with a number of useful configuration workbooks and documentation tools that you can use to help with your own internal Salesforce technical architecture program. So without further ado, talk to you a little bit about today's agenda. First, I'll talk to you about our goal. I'll talk about some general Winter 16 themes, and then I'll talk about what's new in Winter 16, and then finally we'll have a quick question and answer. So before I get started, I do want to mention a lot of the images and graphics throughout this presentation are copyrighted by Salesforce. Many of them come from the Salesforce release notes, and you can see their URL to the Salesforce Winter 16 release notes. We will not be covering everything that is in the Salesforce release today because it's just too large. And in particular, we will not be covering in detail any of the Lightning experience enhancements, although we will touch on it in a number of different places. If you want more information about Salesforce Lightning Experience, I encourage you to check out our webinar next Friday on the Lightning Experience specifically. So today's goal. The Winter 16 release notes are 475 pages long, and at least a quarter of those are explicitly concerned with the Lightning Experience, and probably a quarter of what remains covers the Lightning Experience, either discussing various features that are only available in Lightning or that are different in the Lightning Experience in some way. I'm not really going to be touching on that in depth, but what I will be focusing on is a little bit of discussion of Apex and Visualforce, but ultimately what has been done and why. I'm going to try to tell you why you should care about these Salesforce changes that are coming out in Winter 16. Again, not specifically Lightning Experience, although I will be touching on that a little bit, and I'll be covering it in much greater depth next Friday. So the Winter 16 release themes. The Lightning Experience, of course, is the biggest theme, over a quarter of the volume of the release notes. With that, a dramatic improvement in sales processes with some implications for development. Lightning Experience in particular does not support all of the objects and capabilities of Salesforce Classic. And then just another reminder to attend our webinar next Friday for more details, or of course read the release notes. Mobile is another continued theme in Winter 16. Data.com with some additional business data being added. Communities that are being continued to be expanded both in capability and into the Lightning Experience. And then some overall improvements in collaboration and some of the other elements of Lightning, including the visual workflow improvements, process builder improvements, and Lightning Connect. So to talk about some general enhancements first, field audit trail support has been added to additional objects so that you can now add field audit trail to most of the objects in Salesforce. You now have the ability to synchronize Salesforce with a second org for high availability. This is a big deal for customers who need to access Salesforce during scheduled or even unscheduled downtime. It's also potentially interesting for customers who want to have mirror orgs of Salesforce for some reason, whether it's for analytics reasons or integration reasons. So you might want to look into this if you do need to mirror or replicate your production Salesforce org into a second Salesforce org. Now, that being said, it is really intended for high availability, so your mileage may vary as you talk about some of those other use cases. It's now possible to set audit fields and update records with inactive users. A big deal for customers who have very tight audit and compliance requirements around employee deactivation, where you might need to deactivate an employee when they leave the company before you are able to update all of their opportunities and reassign them, or before you're able to close tasks and reassign activities, opportunities, and the like. So worth looking at if you've had issues with inactive users and integrations in the past. And then finally, some changes to browsers and the Lightning experience. Just to summarize that, the Lightning experience is supported in the current versions, that is the newest versions of Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox, as well as Internet Explorer 11. Salesforce Classic continues to be supported in Internet Explorer 9, 10, 11, as well as in the newest versions of Chrome and Mozilla Firefox. But that said, if you are planning to use the Lightning experience, you should definitely test it in the newest browsers and in your older browsers, just to make sure that you are aware of what you're getting yourself into. Some critical updates. Some of these are officially critical updates according to Salesforce. Some of these I consider to be critical updates. So the first of these, My Domain, is now required in order to use Lightning components. EnablePath has been recommending that all of our customers use My Domain from day one for some time. My Domain essentially gives you a unique URL that is not shared by any other Salesforce customers or by your own sandboxes, which makes it a lot easier to do things like debugging and development. It also makes it possible to do single sign-on, where you might access Salesforce and be redirected to your own corporate internal single sign-on environment. Now, Lightning Domain is required for Lightning components, and that's part of the whole Lightning components paradigm of sandboxing both for browser data and JavaScript data. Visual Force pages in Lightning Experience now run in an iframe. We'll talk about this later, but that's a huge deal for developers who relied on access to the Salesforce frame for their pages. EnablePath has one customer right now who uses JavaScript extensively for page redirects, so that when you click on one button on a page, you get redirected to another page. Those JavaScript elements will no longer work in Visual Force pages in Lightning Experience. It's not difficult to modify them to work properly, but it will require a little bit of effort. The Salesforce critical updates to serve static resources from the Visual Force domain and to have page references to get content and get content as PDF methods behave as callouts have both been postponed. Both of those are required for the Lightning experience. They're related to Visual Force pages running in an iframe. They're related to the way callouts behave, and they're related to the way Lightning components function. So you can expect that those critical updates are not going to be canceled or postponed indefinitely. They've just been delayed for another release or two. So talking now through each of the Salesforce clouds, although Salesforce has moved away from discussing their brand features as clouds, and they're now more towards platforms. But the first platform is Wave Analytics. Analytics is now integrated better with Salesforce S-Objects. It is now possible to integrate S-Objects into Salesforce Wave Analytics in a standardized, scheduled format, rather than having to wait until your data transformation process runs within Wave Analytics, which means that it's now possible to get closer to real-time access, although it's still not quite real-time. There's a new Wave application for the Sales Cloud, which is great for those of you who use Sales for managing opportunities, quotes, products, sales pipeline, and things like that. There are a lot of new reports and dashboards and Wave lenses available for you to work with that are pre-configured for the Sales Cloud. Data access improvements for Wave Analytics. Better support for multiple matches, which is what the SQL world would view as a join. Better date and group filtering, which is important for those of you who are trying to do business intelligence and things like year-over-year, quarter-over-quarter analytics. And then now support for case statements and better math functions in the Salesforce Analytics query language. It's now also possible to link from dashboard tables and charts with custom actions into Salesforce, which means that Wave user interfaces can now be added, can now be linked directly to Salesforce. So you can link to Salesforce from Wave, and you can link to Wave from Salesforce, for example, by adding dashboards to page layouts. You can now export PNG versions of dashboards, and Wave Analytics now has a REST API available for accessing that data either through Salesforce or through other web pages. Both of these are features that have been requested since early in the Wave application, and it's great to see these being added now because it makes Wave much more accessible to companies who want to incorporate Wave data and Wave Analytics into offline presentations. So talking about mobile, Salesforce One is Salesforce's mobile application. Salesforce One no longer refers to Salesforce in aggregate or as a whole. It now refers specifically to the Salesforce mobile application. And Salesforce is continuing their push to merge the desktop and mobile experiences. What this means, you can do more on the go with better font, more labels, infinite scrolling, so you no longer have to limit yourself to viewing only the first 50 records of a related list, access to new notes and files capability, support for the SOS video chat and screen sharing from within Salesforce One. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. And then support for reducing duplicate record entry by validating your duplicate prevention rules that were introduced in the last Salesforce release in real time as you enter them on the mobile device rather than waiting until you attempt to submit. So just a better user experience for mobile users. On the communities side, Salesforce has come out with new Winter 16 templates that support Lightning components. Templates, especially the Napili template, is now extensible with components, which means that you can configure that template to use Lightning UI components and to use other elements of Salesforce much more than you were able to in the past without modifying the visual force of that template. Installing the new templates will overwrite most existing customizations, so I definitely recommend that you read the release notes carefully before you move forward with these new templates. There have also been some search improvements, improvements for community management. Community Builder itself now supports templates as well as some of the site.com content management capabilities. There's also much improved support for automatic content filtering and moderation within Chatter. And we might talk about that a little bit later when we're talking about Salesforce's collaboration improvements. But it's particularly important for communities where you might want to have anything from curse word or prohibited word filters to personally identifiable information filters. Improvements to the Sales Cloud include an improved and more and denser Sales Console. Nothing really new and particularly exciting here, but just great to see continued improvement in the Salesforce console, which remains probably the best alternate user interface to the standard Salesforce user experience that we all see when we first log in and start working with Salesforce. Other general improvements include sales processes and Lightning Experience. Again, tune in Friday for more information on this. An opportunity board, again, part of Lightning Experience, that allows you to graphically and visually display your opportunities and move them from one stage to another so you can really understand your opportunity pipeline and work with it in real time. Account insights, and then some improvements to products and price books. On the email side, there's a new Salesforce app for Outlook available that you can download from store.office.com. Once that's integrated with Salesforce, it provides some but not all of the capabilities of the existing Salesforce for Outlook application. Now, along with this, the Connect for Outlook app has been retired. And it's important to note that the Salesforce for Outlook app is still alive and well. It is an Outlook plugin that has to run on your computer. Salesforce app is not an Outlook plugin. It operates within the Outlook and Office 365 environment. Connect for Outlook is a plugin that is no longer being maintained. Additional changes to email include rich text support, and I believe rich text support has also been added to Chatter, so that's definitely worth looking at if you've been waiting for that to happen. Continued improvements to Salesforce's duplicate record tracking and prevention. On the data.com side, there's a new capability for company hierarchies so that you can view your D&B company hierarchy, which could be different from the organization hierarchy that you have configured within Salesforce. Data.com data has extended or expanded display in the Sales Console, as well as more data points, including the SIC8 data. And I believe there are 5 or 6 different levels of SIC8 data available to you, so you can see all of the different lines of business that your customers might work in, including their primary, secondary, and so forth, which is a great way to really understand what your customers are doing. And then some other data points, including Fortune 1000 rank, revenue growth, employee growth, and so forth. A quick note here, the social key is being retired. The social key was part of the original Jigsaw and Data.com family. It's being replaced by the D&B DUNS number as a primary key. So if you are still using the social key, you should look into how you can replace that with the DUNS number or some other primary key in Salesforce. Big news on the Service Cloud is support for SOS video chat and screen sharing, which now supports Android. So that's a great way to do screen sharing and chat with your Salesforce agent so that you can connect more directly with your customers and provide them better support by seeing what they see on their mobile device screen and then potentially also seeing them so that you can talk with them face-to-face, as it were. Better support in Live Agent for an improved UI on the customer side, the ability for support agents to ask for help and see that flag pop up in the support manager's console so that they can chat with the agent directly and provide support. And then Apex classes to help filter and moderate content. Excuse me, I don't believe those are Apex classes. I think they're actually JavaScript regular expressions that allow you to filter things like social security numbers, account numbers, personal names that you might not want to record through Salesforce. Salesforce is also making generally available and improving their Omnichannel support, which allows you to push any kind of work based on skills and availability. Just like you've been able to do with Salesforce Live Agent for some time, you can now do this with any kind of object, kind of like a queue, but better. A number of our customers have been asking for a long time for the ability to push items out of a queue to their agents rather than waiting for their agents to cherry pick or remember to pick something off the queue. Well, Omnichannel now allows you to do that so that you can assign skills to your agents or to your workers of any kind, whether they're support agents or back office workers, and then push objects to them rather than waiting for them to view a list feed and pick them up. An improved case feed, including custom feed filters and quick actions, and an improved file widget for emails that makes it a lot easier to attach files from anywhere in Salesforce to your emails. Then I already mentioned organization sync for those of you who need true 100% uptime with the ability to synchronize between Salesforce instances so that you don't have downtime during a Salesforce maintenance release. Improvements to Chatter include new broadcast groups, which are basically nothing more than a group that can only be posted to by the moderator. Great for announcements groups, human resources groups, potentially even things like sales announcements where I want to allow a robot running in the background to post information about a closed opportunity and then maybe let people comment on that, but I don't want to allow anyone to post to that group so that I can control the chatter, the noise on that group. Better support for files and notes, which are two new capabilities. I'm not going to go into them much here, but essentially files brings the capabilities of Salesforce files and Salesforce content to the long-standing notes and attachments capability of Salesforce, essentially replacing that with a better notes capability that is chatter-based and a better files capability that is chatter and content-based. Support for user profiles for orgs that do not have chatter enabled. The ability to mute posts when perhaps you've been mentioned on a post and you just no longer care about it, either because it's moved on beyond your area of responsibility or because it's just running along. The ability to @mention a particular group from a record, which associates that Salesforce record to the group, so that when you go and look at the group, you can see the most recent @mentioned records. I already mentioned improved moderation and filtering. And then for those of you who have a lot of chatter users, you might want to take a look at the redesigned notifications. Nothing particularly different, but they do look a little bit different from what they did before. So moving on to development, some changes to how Salesforce sandboxes and deployments work. It's now possible to choose which tests to run during a change set. That's very important for the larger organizations that might have a lot of code that takes hours or, in some extreme cases, days to run all of the possible unit tests. In previous releases, Salesforce allowed you to run those unit tests in advance so that you could confirm that they were deployed and then choose the exact timing of your activation, where the activation would not require you to run the unit tests again. Well, change sets now allow you to choose whether you want to run all tests, only tests that are custom development, or only a specific set of tests that are listed by you. Now, when you're deploying to production, you still have to make sure that you have that 75% aggregate unit test coverage. Improved deployment experience during service upgrades for anyone who's had problems with deploying code during a service upgrade, especially if you're deploying code to support a service upgrade, where that deployment would fail if Salesforce upgraded their platform during that deployment. That no longer happens. The deployment will pause and continue after that service upgrade has occurred. And then, shouldn't affect most of you, but there are some enhancements to how sandboxes are activated. The most important being there's now a better, faster sandbox creation process where Salesforce will not only replicate or synchronize the metadata at the beginning of the deployment process and then the data after that, but Salesforce will now do a delta at the end of the sandbox creation process to make sure that your sandboxes now accurately 100% match the production org, even if changes are made to production or data, or excuse me, to metadata or data in the production org after the sandbox refresh process has started. Again, shouldn't affect most of you, but those of you who have workarounds in place because you are doing things like automated backups or automated sandbox deployments with strict deployment processes, you might want to take some time and experiment with how this changes it. It might make your life a little bit easier. So changes to the standard Salesforce customization include a new setup experience for Lightning Experience, including a way to manage standard and custom objects from a single setup screen, which is an enhancement that's been asked for at least 3 or 4 years that I can remember. Now, it's important to note the Lightning Experience setup is not fully compatible with Salesforce Classic, but it will get there. Another important thing to note, the Lightning Experience record home pages, which I'm incredibly excited about. They're a new way to add, to create record home pages that are just a little bit more powerful, a lot more powerful and interesting than the existing Salesforce tabs, where you got to choose whether you wanted to look at a visual force page or a list view that was configured by the user. Well, in Lightning Experience, list views themselves are much more configurable, but you're also going to have the ability to configure those record home pages so that you can add charts and graphs and Lightning components and list views and chatter feeds and you name it. However, while that is available in pilot and you can activate it in your dev org or in Sandbox, record home pages that are created in the current version of Lightning Experience setup screens will not be migrated to future Salesforce releases, so you should watch out for that. Major news for those of you who use global pick lists. It has long been the case that customers who wanted relatively static lists, for example, a list of US states on multiple S objects, had to choose whether to create a custom object for a state and then create multiple pick lists, which was a relatively heavy way of doing things and had some negative reporting implications, or you had to create a separate independent pick list on every object. Now, not such a big deal for states, but could be a big deal if you're talking about product families or sales engineers or salespeople, for example, where you wanted to have the pick list concept, but it really just didn't justify a related list. Well, now you can create a global pick list that will contain values, and then you can use that global pick list multiple times on multiple objects, and changes to that pick list will be reflected on the pick list on each of the child objects or each of the objects implementing it. There's also support now for enforcing pick list values. Those of you who may have taken advantage of, either deliberately or accidentally, the ability to load data into a Salesforce pick list field that was not intended, it wasn't one of the available values, you might want to look into this. You now have the ability to either enforce the available values or not. So you might want to look into that to make sure that your integrations are properly configured. Improvements to Process Builder and Visual Workflow primarily include better batch handling. Now, in my opinion, these are still not going to be 100% batch friendly until you as developers make them batch friendly. However, it's now a little bit easier to write process builder flows or visual workflows that query for S objects and make changes, create records, and so forth, because Salesforce will do its best to optimize those batch queries so that queries you make are automatically aggregated, so that instead of issuing, for example, 200 individual queries, it might issue 100 queries as a single batch, acting only as one query, and then 100 additional queries, which would get you down below that 200 SOQL call limit. Within Visual Workflow, you'll find better debugging, both by email and in the debugging console, the ability to post to community chatter feeds, which a number of customers have been waiting for. Visual Workflow has had the ability to post to chatter, but not to community feeds. And then within the Process Builder, it's now possible to schedule multiple events as the result of a process trigger, where when for example, if a Salesforce opportunity closes, you might want to schedule an immediate installation, a 2-day customer follow-up, and then a 2-week customer satisfaction follow-up. Well, that's now all possible as part of a single Process Builder flow, rather than having to create multiple flows or use Apex. On the integration front, Lightning Connect has received writable object support, which means that it's now possible to connect external data from a SQL server or pretty much any kind of data source into Salesforce, and it's now possible to double-click, edit that object, save it, and have those changes saved back into your local SQL server. Now, this continues to be appropriate only for detail-level records where you do not need to report on it, because Lightning Connect still does not support reporting or record-level sharing. What that means is you want to use this for data that you're not going to need to report on in aggregate, or that you're not going to make available to users just to go fishing or go researching in this data. So for example, this might be appropriate for order line items or shipment line items, or potentially even orders or shipments where you need real-time access to your data in SAP or Oracle, but you don't necessarily need to do real-time reporting through Salesforce. You might have your own reporting tools available for that. I already mentioned enforced pick list values. You can now update records that have inactive owners. For those of you who have been using either the Salesforce Java data loader or even one of the free data loaders that are available from Salesforce partners, or who are used to using the old Salesforce web-based interfaces, I definitely recommend that you look at the new Salesforce data import wizards. They've been around for a few releases. I can definitely say that I'm guilty of not using them nearly as much or as frequently as I should have. I still tend to resort to the old school data loader every once in a while. But the new data import wizards are very powerful. Multi-step, support all of the Salesforce objects with support for accounts and contacts and products and price lists and opportunities and so forth, as well as all of the Salesforce S objects. And they are almost as powerful, if not as powerful as some of the free tools available from the Salesforce partners. And of course, all of the Salesforce partner free tools are available, and if you want to use them or need to use them. Salesforce Analytics, that's Wave Analytics, now supports data pipelines. Data pipelines, for those of you who aren't aware, are essentially Hadoop-style, specifically Pig-style data processing scripts that you can run in Salesforce to process hundreds of thousands or millions, potentially, of S objects, to process data from CSV files that have been uploaded into Salesforce, or to process data into or out of Salesforce Wave Analytics. Again, not in real time, but very, very quickly relative to the volumes of data that you can process using these data pipelines. If you're not familiar with them and you know what I'm talking about, I definitely recommend that you check out the release notes and then also go to the Salesforce documentation for data pipelines and SAQL, which is a Pig Latin-based language. If you don't know what I'm talking about at all, you really don't need to worry about it. It's new Salesforce capabilities. It's very exciting, but it does require some development capability. On the security and identity front, there's a new login look and feel, which most of you have already seen, so I won't go into that too much. Improved security when logged in as another user so that you can no longer impersonate somebody as an administrator and then use that to activate a mobile device, for example. Not a huge a problem for most users, but it closes a potential security gap. You can now track geographic location of user logins. Those of you who have strict audit and compliance regulations might want to look into that and exactly what implications that has for employee privacy. Very exciting, support for transaction security policies. Not a lot of different types of transactions supported yet, but you now have the ability to write an Apex class that can do things like determine on the fly in real time whether to allow data export, whether to allow particular authentication providers like Twitter or Facebook, whether to allow login, and then whether to allow access to apps, reports, or dashboards. So, not a lot of documented use cases here yet, but I can imagine that you might want to allow a particular user access to certain apps only depending on what records have been assigned to them or what support cases they're working on. Or you might only want to allow them to log in when they have a support case active for them to work on. So interesting possibilities here that I haven't had time or energy yet to really look into, but very, very exciting. And then an improved platform encryption support, for person accounts, case and case comment fields, text area fields, and now the ability to group by encrypted fields. So those of you who have been holding off on loading personally identifiable information into Salesforce because it would need to be loaded into person account fields, or because you would need to be able, as a practical matter, to group by and report on that data, or because it's data that would need to be loaded into a text field. It's more than 255 characters. Well, Salesforce now supports those different fields types and can encrypt them, so it might be worth looking at whether you can now load that data into Salesforce. Changes to the Force.com development platform or application platform. Lightning components and Lightning design, which I'll talk about in much more detail next Friday. But I strongly recommend that you check out the Salesforce Trailhead training, which I'll talk about in the next slide, and get more information on. Improvements to the developer console, including debugging. Changes to Visualforce, including now running in iframe when running in Lightning Experience. Relatively few enhancements to Apex code compared to the previous few releases, but some exciting ones. Support for server-side data caching, which I know has been a request for as long as Salesforce has existed. The ability to lock or unlock records during an approval process. For example, if you need an approver to be able to modify a record during that approval process. And then unlimited callouts to Salesforce URLs. which is great news for users who have been using Salesforce callouts to access things like the Salesforce metadata API, or now with the new critical update that's still pending, the ability to make a call out and generate a PDF file, for example. Well, those callouts are now unlimited. Improvements to testing, including the ability to run tests in both the current release and the future release. You've always been able to run tests, of course, in production as well as in sandboxes that might be operating in different releases. But that always required a little bit of timing. It's now possible to run your tests from a single sandbox or production, both in the current release and the future release. And then various improvements to JSON handling and batch management, which if you do a lot of JSON handling in your Salesforce org, I recommend you check out. Major improvements to training and certifications. Salesforce Trailhead took up an entire floor in the Salesforce developer zone at Dreamforce this year. I definitely recommend you check it out. Trailhead is an incredible new platform for Salesforce that combines training in the form of a website and a web page, along with user scenarios and experiences that you can build out and go through, and then the ability for Salesforce to actually log into your Salesforce org and check to see that you've completed those scenarios successfully. So really great training and trying and testing all combined into a single user interface. It's a great learning experience. Along with that, some changes to certifications at certification.salesforce.com, a new platform app builder certification that really makes that distinction between somebody who is simply a Salesforce administrator and somebody who is a developer of Salesforce applications that don't use code. And then for platform developer 1 and 2, people who do use code in their platform development. So kind of adding that middle ground of users who are more than an administrator but less than a code developer. New certifications for email specialists, social specialists on the Marketing Cloud side, and then Pardot specialists and Pardot consultant certifications on the Pardot side. There are also some new changes coming out to the Technical Architect program. I don't have time here to talk about those at any length, but for those of you who have been pursuing the Certified Technical Architect certification, the good news is that there are now certifications that are much more achievable, much more attainable, and frankly much more relevant faster than trying to get the entire Salesforce certification. So before I finish up, I did want to spend a little bit of time on my soapbox here talking about the impact of Salesforce Lightning. Lightning is really a watershed moment in Salesforce's platform in that it really raises the bar for what you can do with clicks and not code. A lot of what you used to need to write a batch class or a trigger or an Apex class for is now possible through configuration, using things like headless flows or using Lightning Process Builder. Once the Lightning experience is fully rolled out, you'll be able to create page layouts that are much richer and more powerful. You'll be able to add components to pages where previously you might have needed to use complex Visualforce pages or even write an entire custom user interface. And all of that will be possible using the standard Salesforce metadata, which means that it will be upgraded and supported on future platforms, on future mobile devices, and so forth. Now, at the same time, what that means, of course, is that some of the more basic and simplistic capabilities of Salesforce developers are becoming less valuable, if not actually obsolete, like simple roll-up triggers or simple Visualforce pages. But Salesforce has given us Lightning components. They've given us Lightning design. They've also created tools or purchased tools like Heroku, ExactTarget, Pardot, and so forth, that give you access to high-volume marketing capabilities, access to powerful servers and server management environments on Heroku, and then through Lightning components, a framework for you to develop complex user interfaces, and through Lightning Design, a framework for you to build those user interfaces in a way that will harmonize well and be upgraded alongside Salesforce itself. So the end result is that what a small to medium business or a business unit on a budget can do with Salesforce without a developer has really grown significantly in this release and also in the last release as well, and certainly will continue to grow in the next few releases. But at the same time, what you can do with Salesforce and a code developer, particularly an HTML and JavaScript developer, although Apex, batch classes, and triggers are not going away by any means, has really grown by leaps and bounds. So I strongly recommend that as you're planning your next Salesforce project, consider what you can now do with Salesforce configuration and consider what you can now do with Salesforce development, and maybe raise the bar and raise your target for what you might want to attempt in your next project. Okay, so before we move on to our questions and answers, I wanted to do a quick pitch for our ongoing support plans. This is a combination of Salesforce administration, Salesforce development, and Salesforce consulting services that are available from EnablePath on a pre-purchased hourly plan. Similar to Salesforce Premier Success offerings, but definitely complementary and not competitive, in that we will offer configuration, development, and consulting support in addition to best practice advice and an ongoing relationship with Pam Bryan and her team. So if you have a question about how you can use our ongoing support services, either for an upcoming project, or if you just want to understand how the new Winter 16 release, and particularly how the Lightning experience will impact you and your company, give Pam Bryan a call at 770-995-6691 or email pbryan@enablepath.com. And I'll leave us at the Lens advertising slide here while I talk through some of the questions. So the first question is, what will happen when the Connect for Outlook feature is retired? And we've also had some other questions about what actually is being retired. Well, what's being retired is Connect for Outlook, not Salesforce for Outlook. Again, Salesforce for Outlook, good. Connect for Outlook, gone. What's going to happen is after the Winter 16 release, Connect for Outlook will no longer save emails or sync your contacts, events, and tasks between Outlook and Salesforce. What you need to do is move either to Salesforce for Outlook or to the Salesforce app for Outlook available at store.office.com. Next question, can you tell me a little bit more about Trailheads? I keep hearing about this, but not sure what it is. Trailhead is an interactive learning path through the Salesforce platform. It provides education and testing and verification of that testing all through the same platform, which is really great for adult learners. It gives you that reinforced learning. It gives you that trail of learning, so that you don't have to figure out what you're going to learn every day, and you don't have to go hunting for Salesforce resources. Trailhead will just serve up that documentation for you in a link, and then it will tell you what scenario to attempt, and then it will grade that scenario when you're done. And then, of course, it augments all of that with badges and scores and points that you can earn, which really makes it a fun experience to learn with. Next question, you've mentioned there will be another webinar next Friday on the Lightning experience. How can I sign up for that? As you view this recording, most likely that webinar has already happened. But that webinar is available on our website alongside this recording. Next question, if I want to try the Lightning experience,